Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. On today's episode, I have the honor of having legendary studio bassist Leland Sklar for an interview. Some of you may know him from his YouTube channel that he started just a couple months ago. If you don't know him, he has been on thousands of albums beginning back in the early 70s with James Taylor. He's played with Phil Collins, he played with Jackson Browne, Carole King. You name it, he's played with them. Besides being an incredible bass player and musician, he's also a very interesting guy and great storyteller. Here's my interview with Lee.
Hey, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here, man. I am such a fan of your channel, and to actually be able to hang with you is really a treat.
Well, same here. Now, you're a YouTuber now. You're a big YouTuber just in a month. Who would have thought?
Man, it's crazy. You know.
So tell me about your journey to this. Why would you start on YouTube right now?
Well, really what it all came down to is over the years, I've had a lot of guys write to me that had, gone to Phil Collins shows or Toto, and and a lot of those gigs are arenas and stadiums, and they go, man, I could hear you, but there's certain things I couldn't hear. So I thought, maybe I'll do a little tutorials where I'll just quietly play the track and then feature the bass part so guys could actually hear in detail, or as much detail as I remember, since I haven't played a lot of this in a while. That I just thought I would, share the parts kind of with the bass players out there, and it just ended up taking on a life of its own. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed, and my wife at every opportunity tells people, he's a blabbermouth, like Jackie Gleason. He's a blabbermouth, and I love the idea of storytelling and sharing the backstories of these things, and the thing I'm really finding so fascinating is the breadth of people you reach. I mean, I've got guys everywhere from Auckland to Pakistan writing to me, which has always been on Facebook, but it's taken on a kind of a whole other dimension here. I'm an insomniac, so I'm up late at wee hours of the morning, and I love perusing YouTube and just finding all kinds of great stuff there. So, it just sort of happened. I didn't really go into this with any intentions of creating my network or anything. I just wanted to see if people liked it, and they seemed to, so I just kind of committed myself, especially with what's going on in the world now.
When you think back to sessions from, you've been doing this almost 50 years recording, right? The early 70s.
Yeah, a little over 50 years now.
Okay, do you even remember, you have a great memory for storytelling. Does it seem like it was a different lifetime, though, to you when you think back?
Yes and no. There's parts of it that feel completely as though they were yesterday. And I think where I really see the difference is more in in the early days. It was more like guerrilla work. It was like, we were kind of figuring out as we went along. But the technology was completely different. The labels that I dealt with, generally the people involved at the labels, were passionate about music and not so much the business side. They knew money would come, but when you're dealing with Jerry Wexler and Ahmet Ertegun and Herb Alpert and all these guys, man, they just loved music, and they wanted to make the best music they could. And now I end up meeting people of the labels that really have no idea of the history of it or anything, and they're just counting beans. They're checking the time. So there's this dichotomy for me of remembering it. And first off, I'm not patting myself on the back, but I never drank, did drugs, did any of that stuff. So I do still have a clarity about the early days where some guys go, God, I don't even remember that decade. I tend to be nostalgic in my own mind, but I don't want to be like an old fart who just, reminisces of the old days, because I'm more concerned about what tomorrow brings.
Back when you first started session work, you come into a session. What was it like? Would you have demos of songs, or would the producers have charts? Would you always be reading, or would you make things up on the spot?
I would say especially in the early sessions, there was rarely a chart or demos for anything. We would come in, like if we were doing Jackson Browne, he would just sit down and play like Doctor My Eyes, and we would figure out what the song needed. But as time went on and the breadth of work expanded, because I ended up doing lots of movies and television and jingles and all that. Generally there you're looking at charts, and I welcome that at times, because there's times where you go, I'm having to create new stuff every day. It's nice sometimes to walk in and have it cut and dry right in front of your face. And a lot of times they would say, like, now here's the chart, now make it yours. So they would let you be expressive within it. But the confines were there. But it's a little of everything. When I started going to Nashville, I had to figure out Nashville number charts. And sometimes it'd be chord charts, sometimes it would be note for note. But I would say probably 75% of everything I've done, it's been up to me to find the parts, at least 75%. And
when you listen to a playback after you track something, let's talk about. I want to talk about kind of how music has changed in recording, starting in the 70s, for example. You come in, you're doing a Jackson Browne session. He plays the song on guitar, sings it. Here's how it goes. You probably notate a chart out, right, of the form, maybe
a little bit.
Okay,
a little bit. One thing we did have is we had time on our side. So we weren't in there rushed to get 5 tracks in 3 hours. I mean, Jackson's first record, we were there literally months working on it, recutting tunes and going back and listening to them and go, oh, let's try this. So we had the luxury of experimentation and time on our side. There was budgets. If the song required it, you might sketch out some kind of a basic thing that just, you would have a section of it that maybe you thought, I really can't commit this to memory right now. I'd rather play it than think about it.
How involved in the recording process were you with your own personal sound, bass DI, bass, amp tone, things like that, and having a say in it? Would the producer always say, I like this kind of sound, could you make it darker? Would they ever say that, or were you just do your own thing?
They might say that. I usually leaned more with the engineer. A lot of times, I mean, it's so funny. You get in the studio, drummer sits down, plays for a second. The dude plays drums. Guitar player starts playing. Engineer pulls up sounds. You go, oh, he's a great engineer. I've worked with producers that I still, after this many years, have no idea what they're doing. Or I think a lot of times I just say, a really great producer knows when the band's hungry and orders lunch and puts his plastic down. It's more my relationship with the engineer or the artist. There's times where the artist has some kind of an idea what they would like it to sound like. But when I first walked into the studio, my first sessions, I had never been in a studio recording except for one demo. And all of a sudden I was working every day. So I was trying to on the spot kind of create my own thing, figuring out how DIs worked. I had a little Univox amp with a single 15 in it. Really learn while you earn time. We suddenly got busy because it's all because of James Taylor. Mm-hmm. I mean, it went from it was kind of like driving a top fueler. You're going from 0 to 350 miles an hour in 4 seconds. I mean, this is how our careers went. It was just a kind of a ferocious schedule, and just trying to figure it all out as you're sitting on the gig. It was a unique time. God, it was amazing.
So you're kind of spoiled, though. You played with all these great drummers. I saw your video on Jeff Porcaro, which was amazing. Yeah. It was it was so heartfelt. And you played with Russ Kunkel. You played with all these great drummers all the time. You're kind of spoiled, right?
Totally spoiled. Totally spoiled. Jesus. Yeah.
When you would I saw your thing talking about your date book, and you say Jeff on there. Yeah. That if you were doing a session with him, you get to the studio, he's on the session. You guys did so many sessions together. Would there just be a natural chemistry? You kind of know how to play to each other?
The plethora of, I've been playing a lot of Scrabble, so the plethora of, of drummers I've worked with, each time you have to kind of just tweak a little bit, because you could be working with a drummer who's like, like a JR or a Ed Green, who's like right on the money. And then when I work with Russ has Kunkel has a unique style where his snare leans in and his kick sits back. I mean, he's got this wider berth in it. Each guy requires a whole different headspace. And that's one of the things I learned a long time ago. Kind of my motto for myself is everything I do is etched in mud. Because you really, if you're going to do this gig as a studio player, you really have to be a chameleon. And you wear many, many hats. And it can be throughout one day. You could be doing 3 different projects in one day and working with different drummers on each one. And you have to, kind of readjust a little bit with each one. But that's one of the things I've always found fascinating about this. I think the most important thing from my standpoint is be a listener. Don't impose yourself on the stuff you're working on. You listen to where the pocket is. You listen to where that guy, I mean, when I would work with Jeff and then I would go work with Carlos Vega, and then I'd end up working with Simon Phillips or Dave Weckl. I mean, it's like, it's all over the place, but each one is completely valid. So you have to figure out how you assimilate together. And I've been very fortunate that all those guys are also of that like mind, where we just kind of, lock in.
I want you to talk about musicianship from 40 years ago. For example, the sophistication of songwriting back in the 70s.
When I started with James Taylor, it was the advent of the singer-songwriter movement. He was really the one, even though there were lots of them around and previous to that, but it was a different kind of thing. The Tim Hardens and the Peter, Paul and Marys and, and Phil Oakes and all these people. But James was a game changer for some reason. It happened and it was like a perfect storm. But he brought a sophistication to his playing, to his songwriting, to his lyricism, and it opened the door for a lot of these other writers and performers like the Jackson Brownes that came along through that wave. And I think these guys all came from a history of the music that they grew up with. And, a lot of it, when I think back to what my parents' record collection was, it was a sophisticated record collection, from classicals to Martin Denny to, you sort of name it. And so I was completely aware of it. I was a classical pianist as a child. I was a classical snob. But the caliber, I'm not going to say the caliber of musicians was better, because there are so many gifted players.
Absolutely.
Today, it's so scary to look at YouTube and you see like some of these like 8 and 11-year-olds that you're just going, are you kidding me?
Right.
To me, they're just evidence that aliens have fathered on this planet, and stuff. But I think one of the things that made all of that as special as it was it was always a band making the records. It was a room full of creative musicians. And so we would feed each other. It was this constant energy in the room, and this juice was flowing in there. And so when a guy like Jackson would come in and would play like Jamaica City Will or a song like that, or James would pull out one of his songs, everybody jumped on it and almost immediately found their place, because everybody listened to each other. So you ended up within an hour, a pretty complete picture of what the song was going to be, rather than nowadays. There's more and more band sessions being done, even though there's far less work than there was then. But when I get called to go to somebody's house and I'm just going to be overdubbing on Pro Tools or whatever, and all I've got to work with is maybe a drum machine where they go, oh, we're replacing the drums later. We're doing that in a big room. And there's no vocal yet. There's no, melodic line for me. So all I can do at this point is put on a bass part. I can't affect the song. I can't listen to it and go, maybe we could change the bridge or do a better intro or anything. In those days, we were all involved deeply in the entire process, and everybody went in and listened to playbacks and threw out suggestions. It was a real team effort in those projects. I mean, everybody that came in, it was as though no matter who the artist was, as soon as they came in, we were forming a band at that point. It wasn't just a gig. Everybody was really on their A game. Everybody was literally throwing out suggestions, which everybody had egos that were comfortable with. If the artist said no, you weren't offended by it.
In James's music, he has really sophisticated voice leading in his guitar parts. He has a lot of bass motion in his parts. And for you as a bass player, for example, when he's got all these chord inversions moving to have really logical voice leading, what's the difference between a James versus somebody else?
For me, it was really great starting with James in terms of this, because when I came to James, I was coming out of stone hard rock and roll bands. I had never really listened to this kind of music before, because it really wasn't this kind of music before. Right. And when he started playing guitar and we started working, he has one of the most comprehensive ways of playing guitar. So literally, he's like a one-man band. He's playing percussively. He's got a moving bass line. He's playing chords. He's playing all these lead lines. I mean, he's a remarkable guitarist, and he's never really, musicians recognize him for it, but I think in general, that's like not the front of what James is about. But it was one of those things where I would listen to him and I go, I can either ape him and kind of copy his line, or I have to figure out parts to weave around him, kind of just to justify why the hell I was there. Right. And it was a great education working with him. It really made me start thinking, because I was a huge fan of McCartney and the melodic style of bass playing. So with James, it really allowed me to explore that avenue as compared to being in a rock band or just with a guitar player who's just like flat picking and strumming along. James really set the bar incredibly high.
As synthesizers became more prevalent in the early 80s, how did your role change when you started working with, I saw your video when you talked about Sussudio, for example, and that has keyboard bass, and you start having synth bass incorporated with real bass on records, things like that. Was it a thing that just slowly crept in, or was it just the beginning of the 80s was really different?
It was kind of a quantum change. As soon as, to me, one of the worst things that happened from the standpoint of players was when things went digital, when you left analog and went digital, because it opened up an entire different world. Where people started, getting primitive samplers, old Akai samplers and things like that. And I was one of the fortunate ones, because I wasn't just a studio player. I had cultivated being a touring musician. So work slowed down in the studio because of synths, but I went out and toured. I was on the road a good chunk of the year, every year. Mm-hmm. So it was, it didn't affect me like it affected some guys who were really focused strictly on studio work. And all of a sudden, there was a DX7, sitting in there replacing them. And string players, everybody went through the same dilemma.
People are so image conscious in the music industry, and have been for years. But back in the day, there's plenty of people that just because of their appearance, that are famous, world famous legends, because of their appearance, would never have gotten a record deal later on, right? I mean, that's some of the best songwriters, best artists of all time, in the year 2000, never would have gotten signed, or 2010, whatever, never could get a record deal.
But there was always that difficult thing, like when Christopher Cross came out, and everybody went, "Oh man, Sam, it's the greatest record." And then all of a sudden you see him, and he's just this kind of normal guy, and all of a sudden the climb kind of slowed down because of that. And Chris is a really gifted artist, gifted singer. Yeah. But people at that point are looking for like the latest stud, dude, chick.
So that was even the case back in the late 70s when he came out.
Yeah. This has always been there, because I think a lot of that is, even when you're dealing with labels where you have like the head of the label really, believes in music, there's a hierarchy and underlings that are sitting there looking, especially with the advent of MTV and video. all of a sudden you went from being, it's like The Voice doing the blind thing first.
Yeah.
As soon as videos came out, then suddenly how you looked became a huge consideration. And it got really frustrating when you would be sitting there and the label would be nitpicking about the budget, but they wouldn't think anything of dropping $200,000 to do a video for the song. But they wouldn't spend the money on making the song that the video's about. So it's there's so many
for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, this whole business is like peeling an onion, and there's just so many layers to it, and some of the layers are sweet and succulent, some of them just are bitter, and it's you have to kind of navigate yourself through all of this. Nowadays, I mean, it's changed again because things like MTV are kind of meaningless, and it had its moment in the sun. And people are finding all these other formats now, and with the new technologies that are out there, there's so many different sites and opportunities. And I sit there and I watch all these different a cappella videos and Zoom videos that people are doing, and some of them you go, this is genius, this is
right.
So good, and some of them you go, what a wank, this is just, I mean, I'm glad you're having fun, and you can send it to your grandparents and show them that you're viable, I guess, but it's tough. But at the end of the day, for me, it still comes down to, do you have a great song? And if you have a great song, put together the best musicians that can, convey that song, and you have great music.
In the 80s, Phil couldn't miss. Did he realize it back then? Did you guys say everything that you put out, he just had so many hits on it, right?
He's that good.
Yeah.
His pop sensibility is so strong. Unreal. I mean, Brand X was one thing. Genesis is a whole other thing. So in '84, he called me to do No Jacket Required. When we started that tour, we were playing like theaters, and all of a sudden Susudio hit. Next thing we know, completely rescheduling the tour into arenas.
Yeah.
And at that point, he was like the goose that laid the golden egg.
I know. He couldn't miss.
And he's got these like internal songs on the albums, like Long, Long Way to Go, that are so beautiful that don't really see the light of day when you're doing concerts. But man, I listen to those records, and some of the internal songs are so good. But he's just a really gifted guy, and he also is so self-deprecating. We would show up at some place, and there would be some celebrities there, and he'd have his camera, and he'd go, "Do you think they'll take their picture with me?" And we're going, "Man, they're over there creaming that you just walked in the door." I mean, he's that kind of a guy. And the thing that was sweet about him is, like, if you were walking down the street and met him, not knowing who he is, and you got into a conversation, if you said to him, "So what do you do?" The first thing he would say is, "I'm a drummer." I mean, to him, that's really his world is a drummer. And I'll tell you, he's one of the best drummers I've ever played with. His pocket is so beautiful. Man, it was like, now I always tell people, I said, when I played with Phil, it was like rummaging through the closet and finding that old pair of slippers, and you put them on and you go, "Oh yeah, this is really good." I love Phil dearly. He's really a special friend, and he's gone through a lot of stuff with health issues and some bad surgeries and stuff like that. But they're sitting there ready to go out and do another Genesis tour. And then all this came down with the pandemic. So it may happen next year.
When we come out of this holding pattern, because we will. Yeah. Are you going to keep doing YouTube videos?
Absolutely.
There we go.
No, absolutely. And what I'm going to do also is when the time comes where I'm back on the road again, I'll do them from the road, and I'll bring people into like road experiences, shoot stuff backstage and be interviewed, bring in whoever is there. Like when we were out with Phil, we had Nile Rodgers open for us on some stuff. Sheryl Crow and her band were opening for us. So I would engage everybody. I mean, I'm enjoying this channel so much.
So I want to tell everybody out there to subscribe to Lee's channel. I know a lot of you have already, but there's just unbelievably great stories, and to see Lee play and hear him play is a real treat, and really appreciate you.
Thank you,
being on with me today, Lee. It's a real honor to have you.
Anytime you want to talk, I'm totally into coming back. here. I love what you do, and you're a great hang, and I would be proud to be asked to come back.
That's all for now. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. If you're a first-time viewer, don't forget to ring the bell. If you're interested in the Beato book, which has plenty of examples of this in it, go to my website at www.rickbeato.com. You can find it there. Follow me on Instagram at rickbeato1. I've got a lot of guitar improvisations there. Check out the new Beato ear training method. Go to beatoeartraining.com and watch the introduction video. And if you want to support the channel even more, think about becoming a member of the Beato Club. Thanks so much for watching.